Hello, dear viewers, and welcome back to our channel. Today in part 12, we focus on the maybe, mindset, and the power of suggestion, one of the simplest yet most powerful tools that can transform our lives. We'll explore together how this approach, which stretches our mind, softens our emotions, and frees us from negative patterns, can create real transformation. If you're ready, let's grab the maybe, acts, and overcome our obstacles together. The maybe, acts, and the power of suggestion. If concepts stretch, emotions stretch too. Maybe is a flexible word that, over time, stretches both the mind and the emotions. As the mind stretches, its sensitivity diminishes, and its capacity to trigger and nourish weakens, much like how, over time, the word harassment lessens both the perception and emotional weight of the phenomenon of rape, or how the word lacking reduces the gravity of death. Before we move on to this magical concept, let's once again convince our minds. As you know, our method is based on suggestion. What was suggestion? It meant regular, periodic, consistent repetition. Not every meaningless repetition counts as suggestion. The affirmation I refer to is not what I mean by suggestion. Just uttering a suggestion does not mean you're conveying the same suggestion every time. Suggestion does two things. It creates a predisposition, thereby making actions easier to perform. It changes and transforms. A predisposition makes it easier to do what needs to be done. Therefore, if we want to do something more easily, we should accept suggestions in that direction. Yet, the core impact of suggestion is transformation. When you lie for the first time, you might feel a deep sense of guilt. The intensity of that guilt is determined not by your traumas or low serotonin levels, but by the depth of your moral conditioning regarding lying. The more you've been exposed to moral conditioning, the stronger your guilt will be. Over time, if you repeat the same lie 5 or 600 times, that sense of guilt will vanish entirely. You remain the same person, and the lie stays the same lie. So, what has changed? It's the number of repetitions. Notice how repetition transforms one of the most powerful emotions, deep guilt, over time. One of the strongest constructs in a person is the conscience. In fact, conscience is often considered the voice of truth, and we are told to always listen to it. Yet, when we commit a wrongdoing for the first time, our conscience produces a painful torment. But if we commit the same mistake 10 or 15 times, the same conscience will no longer produce that level of torment. Remember, wasn't conscience the voice of truth? Wrongdoings continue, yet our conscience stops punishing us. Notice, then, that suggestion has even transformed a very powerful natural construct like the conscience. This is the marvelous power of repetition. I highly recommend you watch my YouTube video, The World is Based on Suggestion, on my channel, especially at this point in the book. Almost everything in life is a result of suggestion. Suggestion means continuous repetition. Drop by drop, a lake is formed. Dripping water can even pierce stone. What pierces stone is not the power of the droplets, but their persistence. We cut down a tree with consecutive axe blows. We eventually reach our destination by taking continuous steps. We satisfy our hunger with consecutive mouthfuls. We heal by taking pills in succession. We develop our muscles by repeating the same exercises every day. We lose weight by sticking to the same diet plan over and over. Why are friends influenced by each other? Because they are continuously exposed to the same suggestions by being together. If a person attends Menzel conversations for 2 years, he becomes a Menzel follower. Yet, if someone attends Menzel ceremonies for 2 years, no one becomes a Solimansi. Even terrorist organizations transform people into suicide bombers through suggestion. The human mind is vulnerable to suggestion. Thus, we have recalled once again the unparalleled transformative power of regular repetition, that is, suggestion, in our minds. So, suggestion is the most effective transformative force at our disposal. When it comes to transforming our emotions and thoughts, in other words, our psychology, suggestion is indispensable. And yet, even though the industry strives to change emotions and thoughts morning and night, it has abandoned the most effective transformative tool, suggestion. This is because suggestion does not require an office, clinic, session, or therapy. Individuals can apply it at home on their own and still see results. At this point, another crucial task is choosing which suggestion to use. It's very clear. Flexible concepts stretch. Rigid concepts solidify. Flexible responses relax the mind, and a relaxed mind soothes the soul. As concepts soften, the truths they represent also soften. Stretching, relaxation, and softening
On such a basis, psychology can't thrive. Instead, rigidity, hypersensitivity, and reactivity dominate the very ground on which psychology is most easily formed. Almost all individuals who undergo psychological processes have a foundation that is overly sensitive, fragile, and anxious. Some people are born tall, others become tall later through sports or by drinking lots of milk. Similarly, some are born with a naturally flexible and relaxed temperament. These individuals couldn't care less if the world burns. They don't give any weight to the problems you mention. They tend to think along the lines of, if it happens, it happens. If it goes, it goes. There's a village beyond death. Look at the watch you're wearing. You have such people around you. We too will become like these people, the only difference being that we will acquire this mindset later. So, instead of conditional concepts that create an anxious, slippery, and triggering foundation, such as if it happens, if it doesn't happen, if it passes, if it doesn't pass, if I worry, if I fear, we need to adopt the opposites of these concepts, flexible concepts, as our suggestions. After all, problems are cured by the opposite of their causes. High blood pressure, for example, is treated by reducing salt intake. Answering these rigid, mind-clenching, and anxiety-provoking patterns with flexible ones allows us to stretch our mind and soul. If concepts stretch, then minds, perceptions, and emotions stretch as well. When you say harassment instead of rape, not only does your mind stretch, but the concept of rape itself becomes more flexible and its weight diminishes. See how, by stretching a concept, both the phenomenon of rape and its oppressive weight in your mind are softened and lightened. The power of concepts. I always say, concepts create perception. Our psychologies are formed through perceptions. Terms like if it happens or not, if it comes or doesn't come, if it goes or doesn't go, the conditional concepts I mentioned earlier, along with the thoughts that accumulate in our minds over time, cause the brain to feel confined and the soul to be constricted and stifled. They continuously send danger signals to the brain. When we ask, could it happen or not? What if it doesn't happen? The brain interprets it as, it must happen. Otherwise, it's a big problem. I've explained this before. We can only soften these rigid, confining, and continuously anxiety-provoking dichotomous thought patterns by providing flexible responses. The effect of poison can only be neutralized by its antidote. When the mind stretches and softens, the soul follows suit, and consequently, behaviors also become more flexible. The relaxation of the soul and body, in turn, positively nourishes the mind. This way, the negative vicious cycle in our lives will come to an end, and a positive cycle will begin. Thus, from now on, in dealing with our emotions, thoughts, and interpersonal relationships, we will consistently respond with the flexible, maybe response. Yes, flexible responses based on the maybe concept. With this properly geared key, we will transform our entire psychology. By transformation, I do not mean that our psychological state is defective or problematic, but rather that we eliminate the outcomes that arise from erroneous perceptions. Worry will still cause worry. Fear will still scare us. Just as a chili pepper is spicy, right? The emotion of worry brings more worry, and fear naturally brings fear. This is simply the nature of things. However, I am referring to those psychological problems, those conditions that lead us to the doors of clinics, stemming from perceptions, subconscious codes, etc., which are the results of our erroneous perceptions. So, let's begin with some examples to put this into practice immediately. Your brain will present those conditional thoughts, especially those containing conditional words like "esse" and "esse" right before you. They will function like magnets, triggering anxiety and constricting your soul. For example, your brain might say, "What if I have an attack?" In response, you should give the correct reaction, mix the poison with its antidote, and say, "maybe." You will not make the mistake of overemphasizing these thoughts. By giving this response, you align it with the proper reaction, like using an umbrella in the rain. Examples. What if this thought comes to mind? Maybe. What if my heart beats fast? Maybe. What if it doesn't pass? Maybe. What if I get bored? Maybe. What if my soul feels constricted? Maybe. What if I get scared? Maybe. What if I start worrying? Maybe. What if I get sick? I might. What if I die? Maybe.
Every time your brain or emotions present any thought or sentence beginning with "what if" and containing conditional words like "esse" or "esse" acting as poison, you will consistently attach this flexible response, the antidote, to it. You will even use this flexible response in your interpersonal relationships. For example, is it, shall we go to the bazaar? Maybe. Is it, will you catch a cold? Maybe. Is it, will you get sick? Maybe. Is it, will you be late? maybe. What threat can affect a brain and soul that reprograms itself with an unconditional acceptance of possibility, responding with maybe, maybe to everything? Which threat can intimidate someone who is willing to accept even the worst outcome and face death? Suggestion is the most effective transformative tool, and if flexible responses stretch the mind and soul, then once we have chosen the right suggestion, all that is needed is time, because suggestion yields results over a reasonable period. I was contemplating this very issue and trying to develop this new theory when, last week, a client arrived from Antalya. He has worked with tourists for 40 years and speaks 3 or 4 languages. When I told him about my new theory, he said, "Professor, Europeans respond like this. They answer almost everything with possible." That made me reflect once again. I then recalled that our ancestors also thought flexibly. Isn't saying God's will, if it's meant to be, it's fate, for almost everything a form of flexible thinking? I don't believe that our elders avoided psychological problems, except in some psychotic special cases, independent of this flexible way of thinking. However, we can't use the expression God's will as widely as we can use maybe. When it isn't used frequently, sufficient repetition, the effect of suggestion, cannot be established. When someone says, "Is it, shall we eat?" replying with God's will might sound a bit odd. But the concept of maybe eliminates such issues. What differentiates the maybe response from the traditional responses I mentioned earlier is that it can be used more frequently. This very property makes it possible for the suggestion effect to occur. Imagine you have a problem tree with a myriad of branches, complications, of various sizes and lengths. Grab your maybe axe and start striking the trunk of the tree consecutively. The rest depends on your muscle and arm strength. If the tree is thin, you might cut it down in 1 hour. If it's thick, it might take 2 hours, but you will definitely cut it down. With this 8-letter, geared, key, open the door to health and happiness and enter the room of health treasures. Examples continued. What if a thought comes to mind? Maybe. What if it affects me? Maybe. What if it doesn't happen? Maybe. What if it causes trouble? Maybe. What if an attack occurs? Maybe. What if I get scared? Maybe. What if my heart beats fast? Maybe. What if trouble intensifies? Maybe. What if I fall into depression? In this way, a brain and soul that respond to everything with maybe and reprogram their minds with an unconditional acceptance of possibility will render no threat effective. Who can intimidate someone who accepts even the worst and is willing to risk death? If suggestion is the most effective transformative tool and flexible responses stretch the mind and soul, then once we have chosen the right suggestion, all we need is time, because suggestion yields results within a reasonable period. While I was developing this new theory in my mind, a client arrived from Antalya last week. He has worked with tourists for 40 years and speaks 3 or 4 languages. When I told him about my theory, he said, "Professor, Europeans respond like this. They answer almost everything with possible." This made me reflect again. I then remembered that our ancestors also thought flexibly. Isn't saying God's will, if it's meant to be, it's fate, for almost everything a form of flexible thinking? I don't believe that the older generations avoided psychological problems, aside from some special psychotic cases, independent of this flexible mindset. However, we can't use the phrase God's will as universally as we use maybe. When it isn't used frequently, enough repetition, that is, the suggestion effect, cannot occur. When someone says, "Is it, shall we eat?" replying with God's will might sound a bit odd. But the maybe concept eliminates these issues. What distinguishes the maybe response from the traditional responses I mentioned earlier is its frequent usability. This quality makes it possible for the suggestion effect to take hold. Today, we examined how suggestion and flexible thinking soften the destructive impacts in our lives, and how the maybe response empowers us. I hope this segment has inspired you to reprogram your mind and tackle negativity. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next video. Take care, and remember, everything is maybe